Imagine a perfect duplicate of you, like right down to the very last atom.
Right, an exact physical copy.
Yeah, exactly. So this duplicate is sitting exactly where you are sitting right now, listening to what you're listening to. And if you tell them a joke, they laugh. If they, stub their toe, they wince, they pull their foot away, and they shout out in pain.
React perfectly to the environment.
Right. From the outside, there is absolutely zero difference between you and this duplicate. But inside their head, there is absolute darkness. No feeling at all.
Wow.
No experience of the sound of my voice. No sensation of the chair beneath them. Just, a highly complex biological meat machine executing code in this completely unfeeling void.
It's a chilling thought. You're basically describing a creature that functions perfectly in the physical world, but it totally lacks the one thing that actually makes life meaningful, which is a subjective inner life.
Yeah.
There is no passenger inside that machine.
And the really terrifying part is that, according to the strict standard rules of physics and biology, that completely dark, unfeeling meat machine is exactly what we should all be.
Exactly. We should just be biological robots.
But yet here we are actually feeling things, experiencing the, vibrancy of the world. So, welcome to our deep dive. You are sitting right here in the room with us as we tackle what is arguably the largest, most stubborn obstacle in our entire quest to understand the universe.
Which is our own minds.
Exactly. Our own minds.
We're going to map out the very boundary between the physical, squishy brain and your actual subjective experience. And our source code for this journey is a truly groundbreaking text. It's called The Conscious Mind. In Search of a Fundamental Theory by the philosopher David J. Chalmers.
A heavy hitter in philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. The mission today is to systematically unpack Chalmers' arguments, diving into the absolute mechanics of how experience might arise from matter. And just to be clear, we are acting as your impartial guides through this highly debated landscape. We aren't here to endorse a specific viewpoint, but, to give you the ultimate toolkit to understand the cutting edge of the mind-body problem.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to even approach this ultimate mystery, we first have to isolate what we're actually talking about. The word mind is it's so slippery.
It really is.
We have to separate the actual mechanics of the brain from the feeling of the mind. And Chalmers does this by drawing a massive, uncrossable line in the sand between two totally distinct types of problems.
Right, and that line is the foundation of his entire framework. He categorizes research into the mind into two camps. You have the easy problems of consciousness, and then you have the hard problem.
And easy is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, right?
Oh, totally. Easy is a very relative term here. These are problems that might take centuries of rigorous neuroscience to map out completely.
So what makes them easy then?
Well, the easy problems involve explaining the objective, observable functions of the brain. So how does the brain process environmental stimuli? How does it integrate information from the eyes and ears?
Yeah.
How do we focus our attention on a specific task? Or, how do the motor cortex and language centers coordinate to produce a verbal report about what we're thinking?
So if a neuroscientist puts you on an fMRI machine and figures out exactly which neural pathways light up when you recall a childhood memory, or how your visual cortex calculates the distance of a coffee mug on your desk, those are easy problems.
Exactly that. Because they are essentially complex engineering problems. We're looking at a physical system, tracing the wiring, and explaining the output based on the input.
Right.
If you can build a mechanistic model that performs the function, you solve the problem. Its structure and function.
But the hard problem, that's a completely different species.
Totally different. The hard problem asks, why is all of that incredibly complex neurological processing actually accompanied by an experienced inner life?
Why doesn't it just go on in the dark, like our zombie duplicate from the beginning?
Precisely. Why does a specific, 700 nanometer wavelength of electromagnetic radiation hitting your retina, which triggers a cascade of electrical impulses down your optic nerve?
Which then causes a flurry of neurotransmitters in your visual cortex.
Right. Why does all of that invisible, silent, physical machinery result in the vibrant, undeniable experience of seeing the color red?
And this brings us to the two distinct concepts of mind that Chalmers insists we separate. There's the psychological concept of mind and the phenomenal concept of mind.
Yeah, and the psychological concept is defined entirely by what the mind does. It's characterized by its causal role in behavior. When cognitive scientists and behavioral psychologists study the mind, they are almost exclusively studying the psychological mind.
You're just watching the machine work.
Exactly. They observe how a specific input leads to a specific behavioral output,
Mm.
or how a cognitive system stores and retrieves data.
So it's the mind as a processor.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the phenomenal concept of mind is characterized by how it feels.
It's the experiential aspect. And I mean, a lot of the confusion in science and philosophy arises because the everyday words we use to describe our mental states lead this sort of double life. They blur these two concepts together completely.
Chalmers uses the word pain as the prime example of this double life. And it's brilliant because it's just so visceral.
Oh, yeah, everyone knows pain.
Right, so think about what happens when you touch a hot stove. Pain has a psychological, functional definition. It's the physical reaction to tissue damage. It's the nociceptors in your hand firing, the signals racing up your spinal cord.
The automatic reflex that jerks your arm back.
Exactly. And the cognitive encoding in your brain that basically says, hey, do not touch that stove again. You can build a robot that does all of those things perfectly.
But the word pain also has a phenomenal definition. It's the awful, sharp, burning sensation, the actual undeniable hurtfulness of being hurt.
Yes.
That hurtfulness isn't the physical reflex, it's the subjective experience accompanying the reflex.
And to make sure we aren't just talking in, dry abstractions, Chalmers provides what he calls a catalog of conscious experiences. And honestly, spending time with this catalog is actually a profoundly strange experience.
It really is. It forces you to notice the water you're swimming in, so to speak.
Right. We aren't just talking about grand, sweeping emotions like love or grief. It is the incredibly rich, specific shade of deep purple on a flower petal.
Or the mute sense of the musty smell of an old wardrobe, which I found fascinating. Chalmers points out that smells are particularly interesting because our cognitive vocabulary for them is so impoverished.
Yeah, we don't have a geometrical language for scent like we do for vision.
Yeah.
We just associate them directly with objects, like it smells like vanilla or it smells like rain.
Right, but the phenomenal experience of the scent is distinct and undeniable. It's just there. He also mentions the ineffable feeling of the depth of binocular vision.
Oh, that's a great example. He shares a story of getting glasses as a child, and suddenly the world didn't just get sharper, it popped into a deeper three-dimensional reality.
And we have a perfect mechanical explanation for that, right? How two eyes offset by a few inches calculate triangulation and distance.
Sure, the math is totally worked out. But the mathematics of triangulation do not explain the feeling of depth. It's also the subtle, ever-present background hum of your sense of self, the feeling of just being awake and present in the room.
Which all builds to a very specific, famous definition in the philosophy of mind. A being is conscious if and only if there is something it is like to be that being.
Yes, something it is like.
So if there is nothing it is like to be a rock, the rock lacks phenomenal consciousness. But if there's something it is like to be a dog or a bat or a human being, then that entity possesses phenomenal consciousness.
It has an inner world populated by qualia. That's the term qualia. The qualitative, subjective feels of experience.
Okay, I want to build out an analogy here to lock this into place before we move into the deeper mechanics. Because we need to keep this grounded.
Let's hear.
Let's look at a car. The psychological mind is the entire mechanical operation of the vehicle. It's the internal combustion engine, the fuel injection system, the transmission transferring power to the axles, the steering column reacting to the road.
Right, all the physical parts.
Yeah, it's all the physical mechanics that make the car navigate the world. But the phenomenal mind, on the other hand, is the fact that there's actually a passenger sitting inside the cabin, looking out the window, feeling the vibration of the engine, and experiencing the journey.
That analogy tracks beautifully, especially when we use it to critique how traditional cognitive science operates.
Yeah.
Well, if we look at the landscape of modern research, we have brilliant scientists spending their entire careers meticulously explaining the engine. They map the fuel lines, they optimize the aerodynamics, they understand the exact timing of the spark plugs.
And they do amazing work.
Incredible work. But then, once they have a perfect, unbroken mechanical blueprint of the car's physical functions, they stand back and simply declare that they've explained the passenger.
Which is, I mean, that's an incredible leap of logic. They assume the passenger just magically poofs into existence as a byproduct of the engine running smoothly.
They assume that if you explain the psychological functions, the mechanics, you have automatically explained the phenomenal experience. But Chalmers argues rigorously that this is a fundamental category mistake.
You can read the blueprints of a combustion engine from now until the end of time, and nothing in the geometry of the pistons or the chemistry of the gasoline will ever dictate why there should be a subjective passenger experiencing the ride. So, if the phenomenal mind, the passenger, is entirely distinct from the psychological mind, the engine, how on earth do physical brains actually generate this feeling? I mean, it's ultimately just 3 pounds of wet carbon, water, and electrical gradients. Can our traditional standard model of science ever explain it?
To test the absolute limits of standard scientific explanation, we have to look closely at the primary tool science uses to link the physical world to the phenomena we observe. We need to introduce the concept of supervenience.
Supervenience. Okay, that sounds like a heavy piece of academic architecture. Let's break down the mechanics of it.
Supervenience is a framework for understanding how one set of facts completely determines another set of facts. Let's start with a macro-level physical phenomenon, like a biological cell, or actually, even simpler, a body of water.
Okay, water.
Chalmers argues that almost everything in the universe logically supervenes on the physical.
Wait, what does logical supervenience actually mean in practice?
It means that if you possess all the low-level physical facts like the exact arrangement of every atom, every quark, the exact state of every electromagnetic field in a defined space, then the higher-level facts are logically guaranteed.
Okay, so you don't need any extra ingredients.
Right. For instance, if you have 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom arranged in a specific molecular bond, you logically have water. The wetness, the density, the freezing point of water, all of that logically supervenes on that physical arrangement.
You don't need to add a magical water spirit to the H2O molecules to make them act like water.
Exactly. The physical facts entirely dictate the macro facts.
So taking it back to biology, if I were an omnipotent being and I built an exact atom-for-atom physical duplicate of a living golden retriever, placing every carbon atom and every water molecule in the exact same state as the original, that duplicate would logically have to be biologically alive.
Because the state of being alive just is those physical processes functioning together. Biological life logically supervenes on the physical, and traditional reductive science is entirely built on this principle.
Reductive explanations take a complex, mysterious system, break it down to its base physical parts, show how those parts interact to perform a function, and boom, the mystery is solved.
And this method has conquered physics, it has conquered chemistry, and it has conquered biology.
But here is the massive divergence in Chalmers' framework. He argues that consciousness does not logically supervene on the physical.
And this is the crux of the hard problem. Reductive explanations are perfectly suited for explaining structure and function. They explain how things are built and what they do. But consciousness, as we established with the passenger analogy, is not a structure and it's not a function.
It's an experience.
Right. Therefore, the traditional scientific method of reducing things to their physical parts hits an impenetrable wall here. No matter how deep you go into the structure of a neuron, you will never find a physical property of redness or pain.
And to really demonstrate this failure of logical supervenience, Chalmers deploys a series of famous thought experiments. We touched on the first one at the very beginning of this deep dive, the philosophical zombie.
Right. And to be clear, we aren't talking about reanimated corpses shuffling around a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
No, the philosophical zombie is physically indistinguishable from a normal human. Let's go back to your duplicate. Imagine a parallel universe that's completely identical to ours in every physical respect. Every atom is in the same place.
Okay.
In that universe, there is a zombie duplicate of you. Because the physical laws are identical and biological life logically supervenes on the physical, the zombie is fully alive. It digests food, it heals from cuts, its brain processes auditory information.
Right. So when I tell a joke, the sound waves hit the zombie's ear, the auditory cortex processes the language, maps it to a database of humor, and triggers a physical laughing response.
The psychological engine is running perfectly.
But inside, all is dark. There is absolutely no subjective experience accompanying the laughter. The zombie doesn't feel amused. It's a brilliant, hyper-complex biological automaton processing inputs and producing outputs, but there's nothing it is like to be that zombie.
I can hear the skeptics right now saying, but that's impossible. A creature like that couldn't exist in our world.
And the funny thing is, Chalmers actually agrees. He is not arguing that this zombie naturally exists in our physical world. What he's arguing is that the concept of the zombie is logically coherent.
Wait, expand on that.
Sure, there is no logical contradiction in the idea of a fully functioning physical human body without consciousness.
Oh, like a square circle would be a logical contradiction.
Exactly. You cannot even imagine a square circle. It defies logic. But you can imagine the zombie. And if it is even logically possible for all the physical facts of your brain to be present without the phenomenal experience being present, then it definitively proves that consciousness is not logically entailed by physical facts alone.
Because if consciousness logically supervened on the physical, the zombie would be a logical impossibility.
Right. The fact that the zombie is conceivable proves that the physical facts do not give you the phenomenal facts for free.
That is a profound shift in perspective. It gets even more nuanced. What if the internal mapping is just completely different between two physically identical people? This is the concept of inverted qualia.
Inverted quality attacks the same assumption from a different angle. So imagine someone who is physically identical to you with the exact same neurological wiring. You both look at a stop sign. The 700 nanometer wavelength light hits both of your retinas.
The optical pathways fire identically.
Yep. You both point at the sign and say, that is red. You both associate with heat, fire, and stopping a car. The physical processing and the behavioral output are perfectly matched.
But inside their phenomenal mind, the subjective experience they're having, the qualia is what I would call blue.
Precisely. Their inner world is color inverted, yet their physical engine runs identically to yours. Again, if the physical facts dictated the phenomenal facts completely and logically, this inversion wouldn't be possible.
Because the exact same physical input and processing should logically necessitate the exact same phenomenal experience.
Exactly. The fact that we can coherently separate them shows that reductionism fails.
Let's look at one more thought experiment. Frank Jackson's knowledge argument involving Mary the color scientist. This one is incredibly powerful because it directly interrogates what we can actually know through physical science.
Let's map out Mary's situation. Mary is the world's preeminent neuroscientist, specializing in the visual cortex and color optics. However, she has lived her entire life in an entirely black and white room, studying the outside world through a black and white monitor.
So she has never actually experienced color herself.
Never. But she has learned every single physical fact there is to know about color vision. She knows the exact nanometer wavelengths of the visual spectrum. She understands the precise quantum mechanical reaction when photons hit the rhodopsin proteins in the retina.
So she has a complete, flawless physical blueprint of how humans process color.
Right. She has perfectly mapped the neural pathways from the optic nerve to the V4 area of the visual cortex. There was not a single physical fact missing from her database.
Now, the critical moment. Mary steps out of her black and white room, walks into a garden, and someone hands her a bright red rose. What happens?
The argument poses a really simple question. Does Mary learn something new?
It seems undeniably obvious that she does. She learns what it actually feels like to see the color red. It's a completely novel experience for her.
She learns a new fact about the universe. But remember our premise. Before she left the room, she already knew all the physical facts.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, if she learns a new fact upon seeing the rose, this new fact, the phenomenal experience of redness, must, by definition, be a non-physical fact.
That's brilliant. It's a profound epistemic gap that reveals an ontological gap. Knowing the entire physical mechanics leaves out the subjective experience completely.
It does.
But I want to pause here and challenge this on behalf of modern neuroscience, because researchers have made staggering advancements in brain imaging. We can literally watch thoughts form on an fMRI. Chalmers specifically addresses heavy hitters in the field, like Francis Crick and Christoph Koch, who proposed that 40 Hz synchronized oscillations in the cerebral cortex are the basis of consciousness. Or Bernard Bars, who developed the global workspace theory, comparing consciousness to a bright spotlight on a theater stage where information is broadcast to the rest of the dark brain. Why don't these complex physical processes solve the hard problem?
What's fascinating here is how Chalmers meticulously dissects these specific theories to show exactly where the explanatory gap lies. Let's take Crick and Koch's 40 Hz oscillations. This theory is an incredibly elegant solution to what neuroscientists call the binding problem.
The binding problem being how the brain takes different attributes of an object and stitches them together.
Yes. When you look at a bouncing red ball, the redness is processed in one part of your visual cortex, the spherical shape in another, and the motion in a completely different area. How does the brain bind these distinct processing streams into a single, unified representation of a moving red ball? Crick and Koch theorized that neurons processing these different attributes fire in synchrony at 40 Hz, and this synchronized firing binds the information together.
Okay, that sounds like a brilliant mechanical explanation.
It is brilliant. It perfectly explains the cognitive function of binding. But Chalmers asks the fatal question. Why should synchronized 40 Hz neural firing be accompanied by a subjective conscious experience?
Why doesn't the brain just bind the information in the dark without any phenomenal passenger watching the show?
Right. The zombie's brain binds information at 40 Hz, but it doesn't feel anything.
Ah,
It's like the same critique applies to Barr's global workspace. Barr's brilliantly explains how information is routed through the brain, making it globally available to our memory, language centers, and decision-making modules. That explains the reportability of a state.
It explains how we are able to physically say, I see a red ball.
But it doesn't explain the feeling of seeing it.
It's all just correlations. They're finding the specific gears in the engine that spin right when the passenger looks out the window, but they are mistaking the spinning gear for the passenger.
Correlation is not explanation. Neuroscience is doing unparalleled work solving the easy problems. They are mapping the psychological mind with incredible precision. But they consistently leave the hard problem untouched, usually by subtly changing the subject and conflating the easy problems with the hard one.
This leaves us standing on the edge of a massive philosophical cliff. If materialism fails, if the idea that the universe is comprised strictly of physical matter and physical laws fundamentally cannot explain the existence of our own minds, what is the way forward?
That's the big question.
Do we have to abandon the scientific method entirely? Are we reverting to mysticism, throwing our hands up and declaring that consciousness is magic or some kind of supernatural soul?
Not at all. Chalmers is deeply committed to a scientific understanding of the universe. This is where his text pivots from deconstructing the old models to architecting a radical new one. Since reductive science cannot bridge the gap, he proposes a rigorous naturalistic expansion of science itself. It's called naturalistic dualism.
Now, the word dualism usually sets off alarm bells for any modern scientist. It conjures images of René Descartes in the 17th century, arguing that we have a physical, mechanical body and a ghostly, immaterial soul that floats around independently and somehow pulls the levers in the pineal gland.
Yes, that is Cartesian dualism, or substance dualism. It posits that there are two entirely different substances in the universe, physical matter and spiritual mind stuff. But Chalmers rejects substance dualism. He is arguing for property dualism, specifically a naturalistic version.
How does property dualism differ from ghosts in the machine?
It accepts that materialism is false, because there are facts over and above the physical facts, the facts of conscious experience. But it does not posit magical soul stuff. Instead, it argues that consciousness must be viewed as a fundamental property of the universe itself.
Fundamental, meaning it can't be broken down into anything smaller.
Exactly. Think about the history of physics in the 19th century. Physicists were trying to explain electromagnetic charge. They tried desperately to reduce it to the existing fundamental properties, mass, length, and time.
Right.
They tried to build mechanical models of gears and pulleys in the ether to explain how magnets pull on each other.
And it completely failed. You can't build a magnetic field out of mass and length.
Right. So what did James Clerk Maxwell and others do? Did they declare magnetism to be magic?
No.
They simply introduced electromagnetic charge as a new fundamental property of the universe, existing alongside mass and space, governed by its own fundamental laws.
Oh.
Chalmers argues we must do the exact same thing with consciousness. It is a fundamental feature of the cosmos, existing alongside mass and electromagnetic charge.
So it arises from the physical substrate of the brain, but is governed by new, undiscovered laws of nature.
Yes, they are psychophysical laws.
Yeah.
Laws that dictate exactly how physical systems generate phenomenal properties. This means consciousness supervenes naturally, even if it doesn't supervene logically.
Let me make sure I understand the difference. Logical supervenience means it couldn't possibly be any other way. A triangle must have three sides.
Right.
But natural supervenience means that in our specific universe, the Big Bang established contingent laws. The laws say whenever carbon, water, and electricity arrange themselves into this highly specific, complex brain state, this specific conscious experience will naturally arise.
Perfectly stated. In a different universe with different natural laws, those exact same brain states might produce no consciousness at all. But in our universe, the psychophysical laws guarantee the connection.
That makes sense.
This framework keeps consciousness entirely within the realm of rigorous science. It's an expansion of our scientific ontology, not a retreat into mysticism.
Okay, this sounds elegant, but it introduces a massive complication. Probably the most counterintuitive, mind-bending paradox in this entire deep dive.
Oh, here we go.
Because if consciousness is a distinct, fundamental property that arises from the physical brain, we run headfirst into a cornerstone of modern science, the causal closure of the physical.
Yes, the causal closure of the physical is a non-negotiable principle for most scientists. It states that every physical event has a sufficient physical cause. There are no gaps in the physical chain of events where magic or non-physical forces intervene.
Let's trace that chain. If I decide to raise my right arm right now, my arm moves because the muscle's contracted. The muscle's contracted because motor neurons fired at the neuromuscular junction.
Right.
Those neurons fired because an action potential traveled down the spinal cord, which originated from a specific pattern of ion channels opening in my motor cortex, which happened because of prior physical states in my brain.
It is an unbroken physical sequence. At no point in that chain do we need to invoke a non-physical mind, reaching down from the ether to physically push sodium ions across a membrane. The physical system is causally closed.
But if the physical system is closed and consciousness is a non-physical fundamental property, what is consciousness actually doing? This leads us to the paradox of phenomenal judgment. And to really feel the weight of this paradox, we have to bring back our philosophical zombie.
The zombie is the perfect tool to illuminate this crisis. Remember, your zombie twin is physically identical to you, but completely dark inside. It has no conscious experience. Now imagine your zombie twin is a philosopher.
Okay, a philosopher zombie.
He is sitting in his university office, hunched over his laptop, writing a 400-page book titled The Conscious Mind.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The zombie is typing furiously, complaining about the hard problem of consciousness. He is arguing passionately with materialists. He writes an entire chapter about the ineffable rich beauty of the color red and how reductive science can never explain the hurtfulness of his pain.
But wait, the zombie has never experienced the color red. The zombie has never felt pain. It has no inner life whatsoever.
Exactly. And yet the zombie is writing the book. Why? Because the zombie's physical brain, the psychological engine, is processing complex linguistic models, evaluating environmental stimuli, and outputting motor commands to his fingers to type those specific words.
So he is producing claims about consciousness entirely due to closed physical computational laws.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? I am genuinely struggling with this. Are you telling me that when I sit down to talk about consciousness right now, when I say, wow, the color red is beautiful, my actual subjective experience of the color red has absolutely no causal effect on my vocal cords producing those words?
If we accept the causal closure of the physical, that is the inescapable conclusion.
That makes me a complete passenger in my own body. If my conscious experience of pain has no causal power to make me pull my hand away from a fire, and my conscious experience of awe doesn't cause me to say, wow, then consciousness is totally irrelevant.
I know
It's an epiphenomenon. It's just a helpless ghost watching a meat machine drive itself.
it is a profoundly unsettling paradox. Chalmers acknowledges how deeply counterintuitive this is. It violently clashes with our everyday lived experience. It feels undeniably like our conscious pain is the direct cause of our crying out.
Right.
But the framework forces us to dissect that feeling. It argues that the psychological processing, the neural registration of tissue damage, the physical engine analyzing threat levels, is the true causal agent that jerks the hand away and activates the vocal cords to yell, ouch.
So the engine is driving the car, navigating the turns, slamming on the brakes, and the passenger is just sitting there feeling the G-forces, shouting out the window, but the passenger has absolutely no hands on the steering wheel.
That's it.
The car would drive exactly the same way if the passenger wasn't there.
That is the jarring implication. The phenomenal experience, the actual hurtfulness, is an accompanying reality. It is a fundamental property that reliably arises alongside the physical processing due to psychophysical laws. But it doesn't reach down and violate the laws of physics to move your arm.
Why do we have to accept something so deeply weird?
Because the alternatives are worse. Chalmers argues we are forced into this paradox because all the premises that lead to it are overwhelmingly likely to be true.
Which are?
1, conscious experience undeniably exists. 2, materialism is false because physics can't explain experience. 3, the physical domain is causally closed, as confirmed by centuries of rigorous science. If you accept those 3 pillars, you are forced to accept that consciousness is explanatorily irrelevant to physical behavior.
My physical brain is generating the sound waves of this conversation about consciousness without actually needing my experience of consciousness to do it. That is a massive existential disconnect.
It is. But Chalmers offers a way to navigate this tension without succumbing to despair. He argues that this doesn't render consciousness an illusion or strip it of its importance. Consciousness is still the only thing that gives life meaning.
Right.
The paradox simply highlights that we have been confusing the psychological cause of our behavior with the phenomenal experience that invariably accompanies it. Recognizing this distinction actually frees us to do the real scientific work, which is finding the rules that connect the two.
Which is exactly where we must go next. If consciousness doesn't drive the physical machine, but it consistently, reliably arises from it in our universe, how are they synchronized? We need to look for those bridging laws, the psychophysical laws that map the physical engine to the phenomenal passenger perfectly.
Right. Having accepted the reality of property dualism and swallowed the bitter pill of the zombie paradox, Chalmers begins building a positive, constructive theory. We transition from asking, what is the nature of consciousness, to how exactly does it connect to the physical world?
And he introduces a few foundational principles to build this bridge. The first is the principle of coherence.
The principle of coherence is an observation of a deep, systematic relationship between phenomenal consciousness, your intersubjective experience, and psychological awareness. Now, we need to be careful with terms here.
Okay.
Awareness, in this context, is a strictly functional, psychological term. It means that information in your brain is directly available for global control and verbal report.
So if I'm looking at a green apple on a table, my visual cortex processes the geometry and the wavelength. The moment that information becomes globally available to my cognitive systems, meaning my language center can access it to say that's a green apple, and my motor cortex can access it to reach out and grab it, that functional availability is called awareness.
Precisely. And the principle of coherence states that wherever there is consciousness, there is awareness, and vice versa. They are locked together.
So you don't have one without the other.
Right. You do not have a vibrant, phenomenal experience of a green apple without the corresponding cognitive awareness of it in your neural architecture. And conversely, you aren't cognitively aware of the apple without experiencing its phenomenal qualities.
It's a perfect mirror between the two domains, which naturally leads into the next, more detailed law, structural coherence. This concept is fascinating because it gets into the actual topography and geometry of our inner thoughts.
Structural coherence takes the mirror analogy and applies it to the micro level.
Okay.
It proposes that the structure of your conscious experience perfectly mirrors the structure of the information in your cognitive awareness. Consider your visual field at this exact moment. It isn't just a uniform wash of color, it has a highly specific geometry.
Right. If I look straight ahead, the object in the center is in high resolution. The objects on the periphery are blurry. There are sharp edges defining boundaries between a desk and a wall. Colors contrast against each other in specific gradients.
And that precise, complex, phenomenal structure that you are experiencing is mirrored perfectly by the physical informational structure in your brain's processing.
So they match structurally.
Yes, the brain's neural networks are mathematically calculating those edges, contrasting those color frequencies, and mapping those spatial relations in a complex matrix of information. The psychophysical law of structural coherence dictates that the abstract structure of the physical information dictates the geometry of the conscious experience.
Okay, so the complex dashboard of the physical engine perfectly dictates the panoramic view the passenger sees out the window. But this brings us to a massive science fiction level question.
Does it matter what the engine is made of?
Exactly. Does the engine have to be made of biological meat, carbon, and potassium ions? Because Chalmers introduces a concept called the principle of organizational invariance, and the implications are just staggering.
This principle is the ultimate epistemic lever. The principle of organizational invariance states that any system that possesses the exact same fine-grained functional organization will have qualitatively identical conscious experiences, absolutely, regardless of what physical material the system is made of.
Wait. Carbon, silicon, copper wiring, a system of mechanical gears and pulleys. The material substrate simply doesn't matter.
It is entirely irrelevant. If the causal dynamics, the intricate way the parts interact with each other to process information and transition between states, are structurally identical, the phenomenal experience will be identical.
To prove this, Chalmers uses one of the most brilliant thought experiments in the book called fading qualia and dancing qualia. Let's really dig into the mechanics of fading qualia because it forces you into a corner.
It really does. Imagine a near-future medical scenario. You have contracted a rare degenerative brain disease that is slowly but surely destroying your biological neurons. However, medical technology has kept pace. Scientists have invented perfect microscopic silicon chip replacements.
Okay, what makes them perfect?
They are functionally isomorphic. They duplicate the exact input-output functions of your natural neurons. If a biological neuron receives an electrical pulse from 3 dendrites and fires an action potential down its axon, the replacement silicon chip will receive the exact same electrical input and output the exact same electrical pulse in the exact same time frame.
So mechanically, the surrounding brain tissue can't tell the difference.
Right, so you go into surgery. The doctor replaces one single neuron in your visual cortex with a silicon chip. Because the chip's functional output is perfectly identical to the neuron it replaced, your global behavior doesn't change by a millimeter. You still talk normally, you process visual information perfectly, you still recognize your spouse's face.
Makes total sense.
But the disease progresses. Over the course of a year, you undergo continuous surgeries. The doctors replace another neuron, then 1,000, then 1,000,000. Eventually, they replace your entire brain, neuron by neuron, until your skull is filled with nothing but an incredibly dense, interconnected network of silicon chips.
I am essentially a cybernetic organism, a machine.
Functionally, yes. But remember, because every single chip performs its localized function exactly like the biological neuron it replaced, your global behavior across that entire year never altered once.
So my personality is the same.
Completely. You still laugh at the same jokes, you still complain about your lower back pain, you look at a vibrant sunset and you still turn to your partner and say, wow, that sunset is a breathtaking shade of red.
Okay, but here is the critical question. What actually happened to my conscious experience, my phenomenal passenger, during that year of replacement?
Well, if you're a biological chauvinist, if you believe that consciousness requires squishy biological meat and that silicon cannot be conscious, then you must believe that your consciousness eventually disappeared.
Right, because I have no meat left in my head.
So how did it disappear? Did it suddenly blink out of existence precisely when the 43 billionth neuron was replaced? That seems incredibly arbitrary and mathematically absurd. Why would one specific neuron be the load-bearing pillar of the soul?
It wouldn't. So it couldn't have blinked out. It must have slowly faded away as more silicon was introduced, like slowly turning down a dimmer switch on reality.
That is the fading qualia hypothesis. As the silicon took over, the vibrant red of that sunset slowly washed out to a dull pink, then to a muted gray. The sharp, agonizing pain in your back slowly dulled to a vague ache, and then to nothingness. By the end of the year, your inner world had faded to complete black. You became a philosophical zombie.
But wait, if my conscious experience of the sunset was fading to gray over that year, why didn't I say anything? Why didn't I rush to the doctor and scream, I'm going blind, the world is losing its color?
And that is the inescapable trap. You didn't say anything because your functional psychological system, the engine generating your speech and behavior, never changed.
Oh, wow.
The silicon chips were still processing the 700 nanometer wavelength perfectly and triggering your vocal cords to say the sunset is a breathtaking shade of red, even while your internal experience of it was fading to a dull gray.
So my psychological awareness and my phenomenal experience became completely, massively dissociated.
Exactly. If fading qualia is true, it means you could be systematically catastrophically wrong about your own conscious experiences. Your cognitive system would be jumping up and down, declaring how bright and vibrant everything is, while your inner phenomenal life is essentially dead.
That's terrifying.
Chalmers argues that this level of cognitive disconnect is fundamentally implausible. It violates the core principle of coherence. We know, deeply and intuitively, that our cognition and our experience are intricately bound.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Chalmers introduces a variation to hammer the final nail in the coffin, dancing qualia.
Dancing qualia is even more absurd. Imagine you have a hybrid brain, part biological, part silicon. You install a physical switch in your skull that lets you route information either through the biological neural pathway or the identical silicon artificial pathway. If they produce different phenomenal experiences, let's say the biological pathway produces the experience of red, and the silicon pathway, lacking biological magic, produces the experience of blue.
Then flipping the switch back and forth would make my conscious experience of the sunset instantly dance between red and blue, flashing like a strobe light.
Yes. But once again, because the two circuits are functionally identical in terms of output, your behavioral system wouldn't notice the strobe light. Your vocal cords would be steadily saying, it is a solid, continuous red light, while internally you're experiencing a chaotic disco of flashing colors.
Which is completely comically absurd. I would know if my vision was strobing.
It is entirely absurd. Therefore, Chalmers concludes the fading qualia and dancing qualia hypotheses must be false. The only rational, coherent option remaining is that the silicon chips must produce the exact same conscious experience as the biological neurons.
Right.
The principle of organizational invariance holds firm. The physical material simply does not matter. Only the abstract, functional, causal pattern matters.
It's exactly like a musical score. It doesn't matter if you play a complex piece of music, like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, on a grand piano, a cheap electronic synthesizer, a violin, or even by a massive group of people ringing handbells.
That's a perfect analogy.
The material generating a sound is radically different in every case. But as long as the functional relationship of the notes, the intervals, the timing, the harmonic sequence is strictly maintained, the underlying song is identical. The functional organization is the music.
Beautifully put. Chalmers calls this overarching view non-reductive functionalism. It validates the idea that consciousness arises from the abstract, causal geometry of a system. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is what I meant earlier by our grand epistemic lever.
Let's define that term for the listener. An epistemic lever is a tool for knowledge. It's how we prove things.
Right. Historically, the problem of other minds has plagued philosophy. How do I know you are conscious? I can't look inside your phenomenal mind. But organizational invariance gives us a lever.
How does it help?
It means we don't have to guess or rely on biological similarity. If we can map the complex functional organization of any system in the universe, and it matches the functional organization of a conscious human brain, we are logically justified in inferring that the system has conscious experience.
But wait a minute. If specific functional organization creates experience regardless of the material, how simple can that organization be? We've established that a hyper-complex silicon brain has human-level consciousness. But what if we strip away the complexity?
Right. How far down do we go?
Yeah. What if we look at simpler and simpler functional organizations? How far down the ladder of reality does the passenger go?
We are about to ride that ladder all the way down to the absolute bedrock of the universe.
Well,
In the later chapters of the book, Chalmers takes the principles we've rigorously built, organizational invariance and coherence, and chases them to their ultimate fundamental extreme using information theory.
we're talking about Claude Shannon's information theory, right? The mathematics that built telecommunications, cryptography, and the modern internet.
Yes, the very same. Claude Shannon famously defined information practically as a reduction in uncertainty, or, more colloquially, differences that make a difference. It's entirely about states and transitions.
Let's visualize that. A simple light switch is a basic information system. It has two discrete states, on and off. A single pixel on a computer screen has millions of color states. A human brain has an astronomically massive number of interconnected states.
Exactly. Information spaces range from the binary to the incomprehensibly complex. Chalmers hypothesizes a fundamental psychophysical law connecting this mathematical concept of information directly to consciousness, the double aspect theory of information.
Okay, a double aspect, meaning two sides to the same coin.
Yes. The theory proposes that fundamental information spaces possess two distinct aspects. There is a physical aspect, which is how the information is physically embodied in the material world. A light switch being physically pushed up or down, a silicon gate opening or closing, a biological neuron firing or remaining dormant.
That's the engine side of the coin.
Right. But there's also a phenomenal aspect, which is how that specific informational state feels from the inside, the passenger side of the coin.
So if we follow this logic strictly, wherever there is physical information processing occurring in the universe, there is a corresponding phenomenal experience.
That is the inescapable logical conclusion of the framework. And to demonstrate how far this goes, Chalmers brings up what is perhaps his most controversial, startling, and famous thought experiment, the conscious thermostat.
Okay, I have to step in here and vehemently challenge this. A thermostat, the little plastic dial on my hallway wall. You are suggesting that when the temperature drops and the AC kicks on, the plastic dial feels something. That sounds completely preposterous.
It is profoundly counterintuitive to our everyday human-centric worldview. But let's apply the logic we just spent the last 40 minutes verifying. A standard mechanical thermostat is an information processing system. It has a defined set of states. Let's simplify them as too hot, too cold, and just right. It is defined transitions between those states triggered by environmental inputs, And it has causal interactions with the environment, like turning on a furnace. It physically realizes a simple informational structure.
But it's just a bimetallic strip bending as the ambient heat changes. It's just simple mechanics.
And what is a human brain? It is just sodium and potassium ions mechanically flowing across a lipid membrane when voltage gates open. If we accepted the principle of organizational invariance with the silicon brain, we already agree that the physical material, whether meat or bimetallic strip, does not matter. Only the causal informational pattern matters.
I see the track closing.
If we accept organizational invariance and we accept the double aspect theory of information, then the thermostat's internal informational states must necessarily possess a phenomenal aspect. Therefore, Chalmers argues, it is highly likely that a thermostat has a tiny, unarticulated flash of experience.
What does that even mean? A flash of experience? Like the thermostat suddenly thinks, "Brr, I'm feeling chilly, time to fire up the furnace."
No, we must absolutely resist the urge to anthropomorphize it. The thermostat does not have a human mind. It has no concepts, no language, no memory, no temporal awareness, and certainly no sense of an I or an ego. All of those things require highly complex, layered cognitive architectures that the thermostat lacks.
So what is left if you strip away all thought and memory?
The experience would be unimaginably primitive. It would be a raw, fundamental phenomenological flash corresponding directly and solely to its simple three-state informational geometry. It wouldn't feel like being a human who is cold. It would just be the absolute simplest possible instantiation of something it is like.
But why should we believe this radically expansive view? Why not just draw a line in the sand and say consciousness magically turns on when a biological system gets as complex as a mouse or a monkey or a human cortex? Why drag the thermostat into it?
Because Chalmers argues forcefully against what he calls a jagged spike in the architecture of nature. Think about the fundamental properties we discussed earlier, like mass or gravity. Gravity doesn't just magically pulp into existence when an asteroid reaches exactly 1 million tons of rock.
Right. Gravity is present in the largest black hole, and it is identically present in the smallest microscopic speck of interstellar dust. It just scales linearly with mass.
Exactly. If consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe governed by informational laws, it shouldn't just inexplicably burst into existence out of dead matter at an arbitrary threshold of complexity. That would be an unscientific, magical, jagged spike.
So it must scale down smoothly.
This view is broadly known as panpsychism, or more accurately in this context, panprotopsychism. The idea that the primitive precursors of consciousness are woven into the fabric of reality everywhere.
That's a huge shift in how we view the world.
It is. If there is no jagged spike, the rich, symphonic complexity of human experience scales down smoothly, down to the simpler, less integrated experience of a dog, down to a mouse, down to an insect, down to the binary reactions of a single-celled amoeba. And yes, all the way down to the simple informational state transitions of a thermostat.
People will say, I can take a thermostat apart and look inside it, and there is no consciousness in there.
And the brilliant rebuttal is, you can take a human brain apart, slice it into 1 million microscopic slides, look through the world's most powerful electron microscope, and you will not find a shred of consciousness in there either.
Wow.
You cannot see the phenomenal aspect from the outside. You can only map the physical information structure.
It is a dizzying concept, but mathematically and philosophically, it possesses a really elegant symmetry. It integrates our subjective minds deeply into the natural order of the cosmos rather than treating human consciousness as a bizarre, inexplicable biological accident floating on top of a dead universe.
It creates a unified theory of reality where matter and experience are two sides of the fundamental informational coin.
So if simple information processing yields simple, primitive experience, what happens when we go in the opposite direction? What happens when humanity intentionally designs and builds incredibly complex, highly integrated information processors? What does this framework mean for artificial intelligence? And pushing even further, what does it mean for the physics of the universe itself?
This brings us to the final, most forward-looking segment of our deep dive. We're going to take these hard-won theories, organizational invariance and the double aspect theory of information, and apply them as lenses to the two most cutting-edge, hotly debated fields in science today: strong AI and quantum mechanics.
Let's start with AI, because we are living through an explosion of artificial neural networks right now. If I boot up a highly advanced, massive language model or a future supercomputer, is there a phenomenal passenger inside that machine? Does Chalmers' framework argue for strong AI?
Emphatically, yes. The text is a robust, rigorous defense of strong AI. To clarify terms, strong AI is the philosophical thesis that an appropriately programmed computer doesn't just simulate a cognitive mind like a video game simulating rain, it actually possesses a real conscious mind.
But the immediate pushback from critics is always, it's just code, it's just syntax, it's just ones and zeros sitting on a silicon hard drive. It's not a real thing.
And Chalmers dismantles that critique by reminding us that a computer running a program is not just an abstract mathematical equation written on a chalkboard. When a program is actually running, the computer is a dynamic, physical system with real, tangible causal dynamics.
Right. Actual electrical voltages are moving.
Yeah.
Physical logic gates are opening and closing in incredibly complex cascades.
Exactly. Chalmers specifically relies on the concept of a combinatorial state automaton. This is a machine defined by its internal states, its inputs, and its outputs.
Oh.
The critical point is mapping. If you can write a program so that the internal state transitions of the computer map perfectly, isomorphically, onto the neural state transitions of a human brain, then the functional organizations are identical.
And as we proved with the fading qualia silicon replacement experiment, if the functional organization is identical, the conscious experience must be identical. The physical dynamics inside a running supercomputer are just as real and just as causally potent as the neurochemical dynamics inside a biological skull.
Yes.
But what about the elephant in the room? John Searle's famous Chinese room argument. I've heard this deployed endlessly to debunk the idea that machines can ever be conscious or actually understand anything.
It is perhaps the most famous, intuitively appealing counterargument against strong AI ever formulated. You have to lay it out clearly. Searle asks us to imagine a man, a monolingual English speaker, who doesn't know a single word of Chinese. Let's call him the clerk.
Okay, the clerk.
The clerk is locked inside a room. Outside the room, native Chinese speakers slip pieces of paper with Chinese characters written on them under the door. Inside the room, the clerk has a massive, comprehensive rule book written in English.
Okay, I'm with you.
The rule book says, if you see a piece of paper with squiggle A, go to filing cabinet 4, pull out a piece of paper with squoggle B, and slide it back under the door.
The clerk is just following pattern matching instructions.
Exactly. The clerk executes the rules perfectly. He passes symbols back out. To the native speakers outside, they're having a brilliant, fluent conversation in Chinese. They're asking questions about philosophy, and the room is providing brilliant answers. But inside the room, the clerk understands absolutely nothing. He's just blindly moving paper based on shapes.
Therefore, Searle argues this is exactly what a computer CPU does. It just shuffles symbols according to a syntax rulebook. It has syntax, but no semantics. It has computation, but no true understanding or conscious experience.
It is a devastatingly convincing image. But Chalmers attacks it head-on, using what is called the systems reply. And this reply hinges entirely on everything we've built regarding complex systems. Chalmers agrees with Searle on one isolated point. The clerk inside the room does not understand Chinese.
Right, the clerk is clueless.
But the clerk is not the computer program. The clerk is merely the central processing unit, the tiny mechanical piece driving the transitions. The entire system, the clerk, plus the massive rulebook, plus the millions of filing cabinets, plus the slips of paper, and critically, the complex, incredibly intricate causal interactions between all of those elements as they process the information. That entire macroscopic system understands Chinese.
I can hear people yelling at their speakers. A room full of paper filing cabinets cannot be conscious. That is absurd.
This raises an important question, and it forces us to confront our deep-seated biological chauvinism. Why do we so easily accept that a massive network of squishy, wet cells passing calcium ions back and forth in a dark skull generates consciousness, but we stubbornly refuse to believe that a highly complex system of paper passing information back and forth can do the same?
Because paper isn't biological.
But we already proved biology isn't required. Chalmers points out that Searle's thought experiment plays a devious trick on human intuition by drastically slowing the timeline down. A bored clerk, slowly shuffling paper over hours, doesn't look like a conscious entity. It looks like a slow, dumb bureaucracy.
Ah, I see.
But what if you sped it up? What if the paper was moving through billions of parallel filing cabinets at the speed of light? What if the causal dynamics of the paper matched the firing rate of 86 billion biological neurons? Suddenly, it ceases to look like a guy at a desk, and it looks like a staggering, hyper-complex, swirling, dynamical information system.
Wow.
And if our core principle of organizational invariance holds, that macro system must possess conscious experience. The slow pace of Searle's scenario obscures the reality of the macrocausal structure.
That completely flips the script. It means that if we architect the right functional program, we aren't just building a clever mimic, we are literally birthing a new conscious entity into the universe.
That is the profound ontological reality of strong AI under this framework.
Okay, we have birth conscious machines, but Chalmers takes one final dizzying leap. He takes the double aspect theory of information and applies it to the very foundation of physical reality, quantum mechanics.
We are stepping into the deep end of the pool now. Quantum mechanics is the most successful physical theory in human history, but it harbors a massive, rotting mystery at its core: the measurement problem.
This is the famous double slit experiment, or Schrödinger's cat.
Precisely. According to the strict mathematics of the Schrödinger equation, before a quantum system is observed or measured, it does not exist in a singular, definite state. A particle isn't definitively here or there. It exists in a superposition of all possible states simultaneously. It is a wave of probabilities.
But the moment we look at it, the moment we measure it, the wave magically collapses. The particle is forced to pick a definite location.
Yes. And the agonizing question for physics is, why does it collapse? What exactly constitutes a measurement? Some prominent physicists, like Eugene Wigner, famously proposed that human consciousness itself is the unique trigger that causes the wave function to collapse.
Seriously.
They argue that the mind possesses some mystical property that forces the physical universe to materialize out of probability.
But Chalmers can't possibly accept that, can he? Because that would completely violate the causal closure of the physical we established earlier. That would mean the phenomenal passenger is reaching out of the window and physically slamming the brakes on the quantum engine.
Exactly. Chalmers rejects the consciousness collapses the wave theory because it violates physical closure. Instead, he proposes looking at an alternative quantum model, the Everett interpretation, more commonly known as the many worlds interpretation, and he views it strictly through the lens of information theory.
Okay, many worlds. This is the sci-fi staple. The idea that the wave function never actually collapses at all. Instead, the entire universe branches. If a particle can mathematically go left or right, the universe physically splits into one reality where it went left and a completely parallel universe where it went right.
Right. And while the mathematics of many worlds are incredibly clean, people often reject it because the ontological baggage is absurd. It implies that there are literally billions of physical parallel universes being created every millisecond, filled with infinite parallel physical copies of you.
It's just too much physical stuff being created out of nowhere.
But Chalmers argues that if we apply the double aspect theory of information to the Everett interpretation, it suddenly resolves elegantly without needing infinite physical universes.
How does information theory fix many worlds?
Think about what a quantum superposition actually is. It is a massive, complex state of pure information. Now remember our psychophysical law. All information states possess a corresponding phenomenal aspect.
Okay, I'm following.
In Chalmers' view, when a physical brain observes a superposed quantum particle, the mind doesn't magically force the particle to choose a state. Nor does the physical universe split into two physical universes. Instead, the physical brain's informational state simply enters into a superposition.
Wait, what?
The brain simultaneously holds the information state of seeing the particle go left and the information state of seeing the particle go right.
My brain enters superposition.
Yes, and because information has a double aspect, if the physical information state superposes, then the phenomenal state must also superpose. Your conscious experience branches.
Oh my God.
You don't physically split into two meat bodies. Your single quantum-entangled informational state generates multiple, isolated, phenomenal experiences. One phenomenal passenger experiences seeing the particle go left. Another phenomenal passenger, generated by the same superposed brain, experiences seeing it go right.
That's mind-blowing.
And because those two informational states within the superposition are mathematically orthogonal, they don't interact, each phenomenal experience feels entirely singular, definite, and unbranched from the inside.
That is absolutely staggering. It elegantly links the deepest, most confusing mystery of fundamental physics, quantum superposition, with the deepest, most confusing mystery of philosophy, the hard problem of consciousness. It uses the bridge of information theory to provide a mathematically coherent, non-magical way to interpret the architecture of reality.
It is the ultimate culmination of the framework. It shows that consciousness isn't a problem to be solved by physics. It might be the key to understanding physics itself.
My brain, both its physical neurons and its phenomenal passenger, is officially full. We need to synthesize this epic journey for the listener because we have covered a monumental amount of intellectual ground today.
Let's trace the grand arc of the theory. We started with the undeniable, self-evident reality of the hard problem. The fact that there is something it is like to be you, experiencing the colors, sounds, and pains of the world.
Right.
We rigorously demonstrated how traditional, reductive physical science, whether it's basic biology or advanced 40 Hz neural synchronization, fundamentally fails to bridge the explanatory gap. Reductive science maps the physical engine flawlessly, but it cannot explain the presence of the phenomenal passenger.
This undeniable gap forced us to adopt naturalistic property dualism. We had to recognize that consciousness is not a ghostly soul, nor is it a biological illusion. It is a fundamental, irreducible building block of the universe, standing shoulder to shoulder with mass, gravity, and electromagnetic charge, governed by undiscovered psychophysical laws.
From that new foundation, we mapped the bridging laws of coherence and organizational invariance. We discovered the epistemic lever. If the complex, functional, causal pattern of a system matches, the conscious experience matches. It does not matter if the engine is constructed of biological neurons, silicon microchips, or even a sprawling bureaucracy of Chinese rulebooks. Function dictates experience.
And then we took that structural principle to the absolute basement of reality. We explored the double aspect theory of information, the profound idea that information itself, the transition of states, possesses both a physical embodiment and a phenomenal feel.
Exactly.
This pan-proto-psychist view extends the spark of consciousness smoothly down to the simplest mechanics of a thermostat, up into the complex architectures of artificial intelligence, and all the way out into the superposed, branching quantum architecture of the cosmos.
It is a breathtakingly expansive, unified view of reality that leaves neither the physical nor the mental behind.
And to you, listening to us right now, think about the profound paradigm shift you've just been handed. You are now equipped to view your own mind, not just as an accidental hallucination generated by a wet biological machine. You have the conceptual framework to recognize your inner subjective life as a fundamental, intrinsic property of the universe.
It changes everything.
The experience you are having right now, the feeling of the chair supporting your weight, the sound of my voice processing in your mind, the thoughts echoing in your head, they are not byproducts. They are as deeply woven into the cosmic fabric as the gravity holding the planets in orbit around the sun.
It radically alters how you interact with the world. Every system you encounter, every piece of information processed in the environment around you holds a spark of the phenomenal. You are not an isolated observer. You are a complex node in a universe of experience.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you to carry into your day. We've established the mechanics. Every physical difference that makes a difference in information possesses a phenomenal aspect. We explored the tiny, primitive flash of experience in a three-state thermostat.
Right.
But pull back and look at the world we have constructed today. Look at the vast planetary scale, hyper-interconnected networks we have built. Billions of computers, millions of servers, billions of smartphones, routing countless exabytes of information every single millisecond.
Unfathomable.
This network is reacting to environments, transitioning through unimaginable trillions of states, and causally driving the entire modern world. If a simple, localized thermostat has a primitive flash of experience, what is the combined structural, subjective experience of the global internet right at this very moment? Are we right now just individual neurons firing inside an unfathomably vast, awakening planetary mind?
It is a staggering implication to consider.
Something to think about the next time you log on.